Big thing that I've seen, especially at the high school level, and we were talking about, with doing kind of these pre-planned robotic rehearsed type drills, whether it's on the field, on the court, on the ice, and off the court, field and ice, is that their creativity is gone.
Yeah.
And in my opinion, sport, that's a form, human movement, that is creativity. That is something that it is trainable. All right. I have a 2-year-old daughter, and I think, don't you have
Yeah,
you have
two
a
and a
young.
half, yeah, and then a 9 month
So
old.
you just seen, and like today, I went to the gym to clean this afternoon, and on Saturdays I always bring my daughter along, and just seeing her kind of just take some, simple pieces of equipment, whether it's, a light medicine ball, one of our balance beams, whether it's our little trampoline, whatever it may be, but just see what she does with it. It's fascinating, and we lose that.
That was sports performance coach James Smith, owner of the U of Strength, speaking on creative capabilities as an important aspect of athletic performance. You're listening to the Just Fly Performance Podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by Simply Faster. Simply Faster is an online athletic performance technology shop distributing items such as the Freelap timing system, GymAware, K-Box, 1080 Sprint, and the SpeedMat. I've gotten many of these items from Simply Faster and can confidently say that they make today's best training technology available to everybody. The Freelap timing system has revolutionized both my practices and my athlete assessments, allowing me to look at the 10-meter fly capability of dozens of athletes in a matter of seconds. It is wireless, compact, portable, and incredibly versatile. The K-Box and 1080 Sprint are fantastic tools for any coach looking to build speed, agility, and implement training scenarios that go beyond the traditional weight room. The 1080 Sprint is being used by great coaches training some of the fastest sprinters in the world, and it truly represents high-performance speed training. I can personally attest that Simply Faster's customer service is second to none. Christopher at Simply Faster responds quickly to queries, and anyone who makes a purchase from Simply Faster is in good hands. If you want to acquire some of the best high-tech training equipment available, stop by simplyfaster.com. That's simply with an I, faster.com. They are the future of coaching technology. Welcome to another episode of the Just Fly Performance Podcast. I'm your host, Joel Smith. Thanks for being here today. And we have on the show James Smith, who is the owner of the U of Strength in Tyngsboro, Massachusetts. James, not to be confused with the James Smith who wrote the Governing Dynamics of Coaching and many other books. I think James Smith is just a popular name. So there's probably many James Smiths in coaching, but we have the U of Strength, James Smith, and he is a brilliant forward thinker in the industry. I don't spend a lot of time on like Twitter and Instagram and all that stuff. I just don't like spending time on social media, which is a little hypocritical because I post things on social media. But when I have gone through Twitter, James videos have often popped up, and they're always these innovative and creative coaching means. And something I didn't realize about James, and James as well, in addition to owning the U of Strength, has some pretty serious coaching accolades to himself. He's worked with a number of current NHL, NBA, and MLS players. He's also worked with the 2011 NCAA men's basketball national champion UConn Huskies. And so some of the things that I've learned from James, though, recently, and this is the theme of the podcast, is his perception and action work. And we've had a few episodes on this thus far on the series, starting back with Sean Mishka and Michael Zwiefel and Scott Salwasser, and then progressing from there. And perception and action is interesting because you have some coaches who are very totally for it. This is a game changer. This is where we need to be directing our change of direction and agility and moving past canned movements and into free-flowing states that are representative of sport. And then we have other coaches who would say, this isn't part of our job description. We need to stay in our silo. And I think just bandwidth and context, bandwidth of what athletes are working with and context of your position is very important. And James gives an awesome argument for just how important that type of work is in context of his position. And then he's going to get into the nuts and bolts of his perception action work, how long he's been doing it, the types of results he's seeing, the types of setups he likes to utilize, where in the workout he puts it, what athletes are missing, and how he tries to get it. I think that, and this is something that's so true, and we're going to chat about it, and I don't want to steal any thunder, so this is all I'm going to say about it. And I've written about this recently as well, and that is, you have a good program when the best athletes on the team are also the best at the exercises that you are implementing and how you are wanting those exercises executed. So if the best players on your team are the ones who are back squatting, parallel back squatting the most, by all means, have the back squat as a big measure. But for a lot of teams and athletes in sports situations, that's not the case. And so James is going to go into major detail on how this is changing his program, how it's changing his thinking, and how he will never go back to canned and robotic coaching. This episode reaches much further than physical preparation. It reaches into the coaching community at large, which it's interesting how just strength and conditioning, physical prep, is such students of, and as well as a lot of track coaches are such students of the motor learning space, and how it's almost like that is disrupting a little bit, if you will, team sport coaching, because for whatever reason there is that gap that often exists there in team sport coaching. And so I just think it's such an interesting and fascinating dynamic, regardless of who you coach, what sport, what age group. This episode has a ton of really great stuff in it. James is just a brilliant and forward-thinking coach. You can see his passion, sense his passion in his voice and what he's doing, and just how much he cares for his athletes to achieve their highest success. And he will leave no stone unturned in doing so. So that being said, let's get to this gem of an episode with James Smith of the U of Strength on getting better transfer to sport out of our physical preparation programs.
While I was going kind of through this kind of, I don't know, kind of had this aha moment saying, okay, what do I need to do, to offer a better product? I kind of made this change, and it allowed me to kind of really, I guess you could say, experiment, but with different ideas, with, training the whole perceptual cognition, side of things. But it's definitely, while I've been there, basketball, soccer, lacrosse, volleyball, futsal, baseball, everyone's there. And I'm watching these kids going through practice, going through what they're calling skills, and they're just missing the boat. And I'm not trying to point the finger, because a lot of these, they're doing it out of their kindness of their heart. But it's just something's missing, and these kids aren't developing. These kids they're skipping the most essential step to athletic development. And so that's where I kind of see, that's where I'm going to take my services, continuing moving forward, to provide not only the physical, but also kind of the psychological side of things.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that, James. And so one of the things that I think about a lot, like, is this, let's say 20 years ago, when people were more physically well-rounded and developed, is there more, and I guess a lot of it is the coaching too, like, do you have the diverse background that allows you, like what Jeremy Frisch was saying, do you have this movement literacy library that lets you put together movement well? And then do the coaches in your sport, are they teaching you the right things? And I think about this a lot, like, what does it take, and you've clearly done this, like, where you saw the gap, right? Like, you saw kids are getting faster, stronger, but that's not translating. And I think that takes a lot of recognition of the subtleties, like, more than just numbers. You can't look at just, this amount of pounds on the bar, the BBT said this, you have to go deeper. And, like, sometimes I wonder, what is that threshold for people to cross where they can get into that world, where all of a sudden, like, that becomes important? Because I've certainly found that too, kind of as I've gone. I've almost been to the point where I was almost, like, not completely, but almost like resigning myself a little bit of my impact on the results of the athlete, like their actual sports skill. It's like, well, I got you faster, or I get you stronger and faster, so, then you, like, kind of throw up your hands type thing. And,
exactly. Yeah.
But just being pulled towards, okay, well, maybe there's more there. And I don't work with like ball sport, well, tennis, but not like team sport reacted to another person sport. So a lot of my stuff has more been in the subtleties of the movement itself. But
yeah,
it's awesome what you're doing. And I it intrigues me as well, like the like motor learn, like that idea applied to team sport coaching too, like with like, I mean, you and I are like, like I don't know. Crazy is not. I don't like the word crazy, but we and you are very passionate about this type of thing. So it's like, what does it take for a team sport to coach on that high school level to become passionate about teaching people correctly? And why is there a gap there? It's just something I guess I think about. Like, if you work with athletes, don't you want to give them everything you have? You know?
Well, 100%, and that's actually the next step with my business with the U.S. Strength is that I love coaching, and I'm going to continue coaching the athletes themselves. But I also want to try to expand it to the consulting side, where I'm working with whether it's the youth, or the high school, or the prep school, whatever it may be, but really talking to the head coach, or in my area in New England, hockey is pretty much everything, and we have all these different youth organizations that have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of athletes. And if I can talk to some owners, or if I can talk to some ads at some high schools, but just to teach them that there's more to this whole sport developmental process, and it's not about making kids tired, and it's not just about wins and losses, and it's not just about the physical side, whatever it may be, but maybe come up with some type of curriculum where I can attack, I can really talk to the coaches, and then I can have more of an impact, with the athletes, because I've seen it. And the beauty, whether you like it or not, with the social media platforms, with one of our local coaches, they're called Neshoba Youth Hockey. And I work with their team once a week, and it's 5-year-old to 10-year-old boys and girls, and that's probably my favorite age, other than kind of that 18 to 22 age. But the younger kids, I really, really do enjoy. But talking with him and seeing the impact he is having with our discussions with motor learning and a constraints-led approach, and he's applying that to ice hockey. And it's really, really neat to see, because if you go to any ice rink, in the state of Massachusetts, New Hampshire, you'll see the same station drills. Coaches are yelling, parents are yelling, teammates are yelling. Where this guy, it's a breath of fresh air, where he's taking some of these unorthodox ideas and he's really developing. And these kids they're seeing changes. And I'm hoping, this is kind of the first step with working with this gentleman. And I'm hoping it's a snowball effect and it will continue, because it really is. There's more to it, like you said. And if you are, in my opinion, if you're a coach, you should be always learning. And that's not just from the performance side, that's just across the board. You need to find different ways to help your athletes. And if that's not why you're in it, then get out.
Yeah, I feel like everyone who's in the sports performance profession, especially like, I mean, I guess there's so many sports you can work with, right? But like, whatever sport you're in, be it, or maybe just this idea that maybe like at least like maybe on a JV high school or freshman high school team level, just coach the sport. If it's individual ball sports, team ball sports, whatever it is, even just for a little while, just to start to understand and observe those things that make the best players. And because it's not just black and white. You can't just necessarily, I mean, I suppose you could come up with all these categories and try to put a number on it, but I feel like it's like the more time you spend around those athletes, the more you can see, and then teams too, right? Like, and so you mentioned like the station drills too. So, you're like with the ice hockey, so you're just talking about stuff where it's very like canned and robotic, and there's not a whole lot of emphasis on decision making and things like that.
Yeah, exactly. And it's basically they're told what to do, when to do it, how to do it, and if they don't do it subjectively, in the coach's mind, then there's negative consequences. And it's just not how it is. It's just kids aren't going to. I mean, don't get me wrong. The kids that are genetically gifted and are going to be good no matter what, of course, they're going to excel. But it's those other kids that don't, that get frustrated, that get burnt out, that get hurt. Those are the kids that I want to impact. Those are the kids, as a coach, in my opinion, that's what fuels me. That's what I wake up every morning and for a 16-hour day. That's why I do what I do. But yeah, it's just, and it's very foreign too. So to give context, I work with all sports, but primarily hockey and basketball. And obviously with ice hockey, it's very unique because the game is played in skates and on a sheet of ice. And so I'll get a lot of, get different questions when you're talking about, skill development or skill adaptation. And asking is, can you have an impact when you're, training agility, this whole perception, action, intention, coupling. And in my opinion, and this is, I don't have any direct data, but I do have testimonials and I have the athletes that, stick with me year in and year out these past 2 years, that you can have a huge, huge impact. Maybe not from the traditional sense from a biomechanical standpoint, because obviously I can't mimic, from a specificity standpoint, I can't mimic anything remotely that they're going to get to on the ice. It's just, it's just a whole different ball game. But from a behavioral and a brain standpoint, I can, and I truly believe that you can impact, especially at the younger level. I think that you can have a big impact, whether it's decision making, anticipation, pattern recognition, whatever it may be. You can have a huge impact with that development, that part of their developmental process.
Yes, it makes me think about. It was going back to like that little hockey, because I don't have any experience with high school sport coaches. I don't. So or seeing what they're doing, but it's interesting you said that, and because it makes me think about like this canned and robotic way of coaching. I feel like it's very it can be maybe whether consciously or subconsciously ego driven as well. Like do this like I say, like I am going to make you the athlete, like. And,
yeah, it's a dictatorship, man. And
yeah,
that's just how it is. And if you ask a coach, and I've had experience with this, you ask a coach why they're doing it, and the typical answer is because I did it.
yeah.
And that can't be the answer.
Yeah, or they say, I mean, a lot of people say it's to help the kids, but that's kind of just that's like the standard, right? Like you go deeper than that, but no, but I was gonna say like that. It's not that dissimilar to individual sports as well. Like, and in everything I've been learning about run sprint training too, like the idea of like this technical model that everyone has to fit into, have your knee like this, have your arm like this, versus letting the athlete like just try some environmental based drills that are more free flowing and feedback based. The feedback coming from your own body rather than in sport and opponent. But it's still the one where you make the athlete an ambassador of their performance rather than driving them into a single technical model. Or it's the same reason that like Tony and I were just Holler and I was talking about playing basketball and high jump, and why high jumpers tend to roll off the court and they can jump really high, and then once they start getting coached, like these rigid models, the subconscious loses its power in the way that the body was self-organizing. But yeah, I could go on all day about that stuff, but it's like universal principles that dictate everything, right? Sports performance, sport coaching. I think Tony's stuff has a lot of implications to life itself too. So I love it. Wait, before we get too much farther down the train, just of kind of like talking about the philosophy of it all, I'd like to just get into some nuts and bolts too of like so you had mentioned a little bit about what got you into the perception reaction system. I've had a few other guests on the podcast, Michael Ziefel, Sean Mishka, Scott Sawasser, and the people who are really like bringing this forward in the field. I think anything obviously has its critics, and whatnot. So once you got interested in this stuff, what were your first steps in starting to implement it? Well, let's start there. So what were like the first kind of steps you did in that field, and then how have you progressed things from there?
Yes. So basically, the first thing I did, so I used to have, your typical, you have your linear and your multi-directional day. Really simple. So I've always sprint my athletes. My hockey, basketball, we've always done acceleration, max velocity. We've always done some form of sprinting. I've always found value in that. But that was just one day. And then on another day, we would do your typical, lateral accelerations, your closed, whatever, shuffle, crossover, backpedal, whatever, your closed type pre-planned drills, and then some type of agility, which I thought, at the time I thought it was agility, which, whatever, it would be something of like a 5-10-5. So basically, as I kind of, started digging down the rabbit hole, I basically got rid of, part of the closed drills. And it's just real simple, whether it was kind of like a cat mouse or some type of tag or a wolf sheep type style. And I just honestly just took it out. And so I saw, I kind of I let it, a couple months, kind kind of see how the athletes responded, see if they were ready for it, see, just basically just watch, and communicate, talk with the athletes, see if they liked it, see, what their feedback was, and they loved it. And especially at my level, just the engagement alone, that was worth it for me, just alone. So, and so once that started, I kind of just, continued to educate myself with the name, the people you just mentioned, with Sean Mishka and Michael Zweifel, communicate with them, and realize there's much more to this. And so basically to now, I basically am either, and obviously, context is everything, depends on the situation, whether if I have an off season or in season athlete. But we will run in the off season, we will run 2-3 days we call them, so instead of agility training, we call it problem solving, activities. But we'll run 2-3 days of that. And we still keep the speed. I still find a ton of value in our sprint work. But if you want to talk about like on the turf, on the basketball court, before we get into the weight room, we always conclude with some type of problem solving activity. And that, from how I kind of organize that, is basically since I do work with hockey, basketball, but I also work with lacrosse, baseball, soccer. We have a bunch of different sports in kind of the same group. So basically, I try to look, and obviously it's not going to always be perfect, and it's not going to be as representative as possible. But I try to look at commonalities across the board. And so basically, at this point, we basically design the activities basically on situations, whether we call it 1v0, 1v1, 2v1, 1v2, 2v. So basically it becomes small-sided games. So that's from an agility. That's from the kind of the agility side of things. I've also taken it with the perception, and have applied it, to our plyometric work as well. And to our pre-training, which I call pre-training is our warm-up. When you work with a younger athlete, you got to be very careful with how you say things. So one thing, every time I would use the word warm-up, was the kind of that kids going through the motion. I used to have your typical dynamic warm-up, and it wasn't productive. So basically, when I made all these different changes, I basically changed, instead of calling agility training, called it problem-solving. Our problem-solving activities. Instead of calling it the warm-up, we call it So basically, it was a revamp of the entire program. I just wanted to basically have, a new look to it. And so from the pre-training, to be honest, only with our middle school. So basically, our like kind of that 12 to 14 age, because that's a very interesting age to work with, but that 12 to 14 year, that age range, we will spend time at the beginning of a program where we will do some form of a kind of, if you want to call it a dynamic warm up, where we do marching, skipping, different lunging, stuff like that. But honestly, other than that, I've kind of gotten rid of all of that. And basically, instead, we have a thing we call it kind of partner reactive skills. And so basically what that is, it's a bunch of different things, but to keep it simple, it'll be really simple, kind of like a one-on-one type setup, where I'll, at the beginning, when we first introduce it, the partner reactive skills, we'll basically have an emphasis for the day, whether it's acceleration, whether it's shuffling, whether it's crossing over, whether it's some type of, backpedal or backtrack, whatever it may be, we'll have an emphasis. And so we start really simple. We start with very, very, low amount of information provided to each athlete. But basically, we will call out the first movement, and so it's one-on-one. We have an offensive defensive situation. Offensive athlete dictates the directions, so they both know what movement's coming. They just don't know what the direction is. So we'll start really simple. So say, just to keep it in simple, we'll say it's a shuffle. So offense will shuffle right. Defense, they're reacting to the offense. They're shuffling right. All right. And then we'll take it from there, and then we'll say, okay, now we're doing 3 movements. And so we'll dictate the first movement, and then the offensive player dictates the next 2 movements. And that could be some type of shuffle, some type of crossover. Maybe it's into kind of more of a short acceleration to a decel. So basically, as we progress, and this is within a session, as we progress, we slowly give just a little bit more information, and we just try to increase. I don't want to say complexity, but we increase the demand for each athlete as we go rep to rep to rep to rep. So basically, our conclusion of any type of pre-training work is always with some type of partner reactive skill. And then the other component to it is with our plyometric work. And just to give context again, I'm not when I talk about this, I'm not having an athlete that's just starting. I'm not throwing them right into the fire with this type of stuff. So once an athlete, is competent and has the capacities in our triplanar plyos, so they can jump, bound, hop, in all different planes of motion. And I have several G flights where I will measure ground contact times just to get some type of objective information. Once I feel that it's appropriate, basically what we do is we'll set up athletes like a one-on-one type situation, side by side, back to back, where we'll have an athlete. We'll put constraints on the actual plyometric on the activity. So we'll say the coach will say, okay, we have three movements. All right, offense first move. We have three movements. You have to stay on two legs. Offense first jump is a horizontal jump. So the offensive athlete will go. He'll jump horizontal. Defense has to react, do the same jump as the offense. So the defense knows what type of jump is coming, but they don't know at what time, excuse me. So then the defense will respond. Then the offense basically can choose any type of jump. So taking off of two legs, staying on two legs, perform a lateral, diagonal, rotational, vertical, whatever it may be. And the defense is basically responding and mimicking the same jumping pattern as the offensive athlete. And so as we progress with that, we'll like I said, we have constraints: two leg, one leg, combination of both. So the difficulty increases as we go. So that's just kind of another way from a jumping standpoint, a plyometric standpoint. We've added, and I've seen huge benefits in the sense of how they're doing with our problem solving work, with how they're doing with the jumping, and both of them complementing each other. I've seen a big difference from decision making, anticipation. It's been it's something that I'm not going back on. I've really found it very beneficial.
You're listening to the Just Fly Performance Podcast, brought to you by Simply Faster. Yeah, I think one thing, I think regardless of what people would say on, that bandwidth of perceptual reaction, oh, it's the sport coach's job, oh, there's not enough. Regardless of, and I'm definitely in all this. I mean, I haven't worked with team sport athletes in this context, but I do think it's a really good thing. But I feel like regardless of what you say about it, it's definitely a hell of a warm up. Like,
Cool.
And you're never gonna get the same. Like, I mean, anyone I've ever worked with in the vertical jump world, like basketball, they're the most warmed up after a game of basketball. Every time you can't recreate what basketball does, and I'm like, there's really no better way to get athletes, like you said, engaged and firing on all cylinders than something where there's competition and reaction to something, and you're stimulating dopamine. And I think there's not only that what you're talking about, but I think that element is fantastic. And I try to use games. Even my athletes who don't have a person to react to, I still like using some sort of game to get them ready for the workout. And so I think that's awesome.
Well, the big thing, Joel, before we go on the next thing, the big thing that I've seen, especially at the high school level, and we were talking about, with doing kind of these pre-planned robotic rehearsed type drills, whether it's on the field, on the court, on the ice, and off the court, field and ice, is that their creativity is gone.
Yeah.
And in my opinion, sport, that's a form, human movement, that is creativity. That is something that it is trainable. All right. I have a 2-year-old daughter, and I think, don't you have a?
Yeah, 2.5. Yeah. And then a 9-month-old.
So you just seen, like today, I went to the gym to clean this afternoon, and on Saturdays, I always bring my daughter along. And just seeing her kind of just take some, simple pieces of equipment, whether it's, a light medicine ball, one of our balance beams, whether it's our little trampoline, whatever it may be, but just see what she does with it. It's fascinating, and we lose that. And that's something that in my opinion, I'm very passionate about. And that's how basically taking the perception, putting it into our kind of the plyometric world. That's how I really, because when you first introduce kids to decision making, creative thought, this type of stuff where they have to think on their own, it's definitely there's definitely a learning curve, and it's very awkward and it's very uncomfortable, which I love, and it's part of the process. But it's something that they need to continue to develop. And in my opinion, this is just one way I found, and there's a couple other ways that a couple other tactics we use to address that. But that's been a big allowing them to be creative, express their creative movement is something that I hope more coaches see the benefits of.
Yeah, that's something that's huge. Even with like my tennis guys, I've definitely noticed a trend. I was in the last at least couple of years like using like some of Michael Zweifel's the stuff I saw that Michael Zweifel would post, and like just even a very simple mirroring drill where one person is like kind of the leader, like just going forward doing zigzag, and the other person's behind them trying to mirror them. And you watch some athletes who it's like everything has been pre-programmed the way they've been coached their whole life. They have no moves. Like it's just like, okay, go to the right. Okay, go to the left. There's no like creative, how am I going to juke this guy out thought process. It's just everything is pre-programmed. Everything is robotic. And that will only take you so far, no matter who you are, no matter how strong, how fast, how robust, if you can't create. And it's like someone had posted Steph Curry, like, doing some like crazy like way he shot a three as a warm up for his game. Like I don't know if he bounced it in from way beyond the arc or what it was, but he made it and it was amazing. And it's like it's that kind of thing too. It's like I'm sure Steph Curry isn't like doesn't love going to the gym and like maxing out on a bunch of lifts. Like he likes creating, right? I mean, it's nothing wrong with being strong. You should be, but like the ability to create that really resonates with me as well. So and that's one of those things where, well, do you fix that? Is it like psychological too? Is it practice? Do you have to just, what do you do to get somebody more in that mindset rather than that? It's almost like that comes from inside of you, like your rear brain, right? Like that core of yourself, not just like the frontal cortex, like do A, B, now do this, like coach told me to.
Yeah. No, and honestly, that's just the biggest thing with the environment, with the environment the athlete is in. And I love, I'd taken this from Keith Davids. I think this was on Robbie Bork's podcast. I think it was the OPEX podcast, but creating safe uncertainty conditions. And I truly believe that, and like I said, there's a learning curve, and everyone, when you first they get first exposed to this, there's going to be a delay. There's going to be kind of that deer in headlight, what to do type thing. But if they realize that, hey, I'm not going to scream at you. Hey, I'm not going to, whatever it may be, that it's safe. You can explore. You can express any type. You can. I want you to express your creativity. I want you to experiment. You're so used to doing this. I want you, getting out of that and try something else out. I think that once a kid understands that, there's that they figure it out. And that's why I think that so many coaches really limit athletes because they don't realize what they're really capable of. And with me, once I kind of, and don't get me, I used to be, when I first started, it was, I was very, it was a coach centered model where now I'm more of a learner centered model. But kids will surprise you. That's for sure. Kids will surprise you when you give them the chance and you realize that part of learning is messy. Kids are going to mess up. It happens. And as long as you're not putting a kid in danger, kids will surprise you. And I see it on a daily basis.
Yeah. I love that, James. That's like, yeah, it's good stuff. And it's like, I mean, the best coaches are always drawing from more realms than just exercise physiology. It's like, it's sad. Like that's where we're trained. So. Yeah, that's where we're trained, like, XPhys and all like evidence-based sets and reps and periodization. It's like, Is that what makes a good athlete? Like, I mean, it can help. It can help. Like I mean, I've heard people say like, strength and conditioning, sports science, it's not going to win you a championship, but it can keep you from screwing it up or something like that tune. But I do think on your level, there's, and even the college and maybe even beyond, there's always room for that stuff. Like I don't know how many people get to the pros who aren't at least somewhat creative with movement, but it's it's probably some need of that is always there in some way, shape, or form. And I mean, I would love to spend time at your gym doing those kind of things. I know my buddy Paul Cater's always coming up with ways to be creative at his spot down in Monterey, and you see these things, and it makes a big difference. I wanted to ask you, so expanding to, because here's like, I don't know if I call it like a hater question, or maybe just honestly, well, it's a question I would have, because I'm not super experienced with this stuff on a team sport react to a person level, and so I'm hoping for your insight on this one. Or maybe devil's advocate if nothing else. So I read the book Bounce a long time ago, and it was kind of talking about, the short-sighted games. I think they were talking about short-sighted games in the Brazilian futsal and where that all started and how much faster the Brazilians were reacting to everybody else. And that's like super simple, right? Just put the goals closer together, the lines closer together, and there you go. Or the guy who grew up playing table tennis with his back against the wall and he had no choice but to be fast. But what would you do? And in the book, they were talking about like the author of the book played Federer in like, the author of the book was a table tennis player, and Federer obviously regular tennis, and they played some game that was like, and I've probably mentioned this in the past on my show, but like where it was like half the size of a tennis court and different like tools and ball size and implements, and they were both terrible at it because all the cues were off or something like that. It sounds like you're really building the human to human reaction and just honing in on that, because obviously once you bring like the sport elements, like the sport gear and the ball size or whatever in there, it probably becomes a little different. You really are focusing on the human to human reaction element, I'm assuming, or can you just go into like the transfer? People talk about transfer and that type of thing.
Yeah, so mine's human. Yeah, mine's is athlete to athlete. And the big thing is, so when you look at, from a motor learning standpoint, uh, your activities, your drills, your games, whatever you want to call it, they need to be as representative as possible. But from a logistics standpoint, I can't go onto an ice rink. I guess I could go onto a basketball court because I do have access to that. But to keep it simple for this conversation, I'm not going to have a kid on the ice with with their full gear on, with a hockey stick, with a puck, that type of thing. So when I'm training, these skills, it's always, athlete opponent to opponent, and both, since I work, excuse me, with the, invasion type sports, my athletes, and even if I wasn't, I would have both athletes, especially the younger they are and the less experienced they are, I want them in offensive and defensive situations. Because when I'm training, and this is, we were talking about earlier, I have questions about training ice hockey, and is it relevant? Is it wasted time, or are you being productive? Where I truly believe, because maybe not from a biomechanical or a traditional sense, but from a brain, in a behavioral standpoint, especially with the intentions. I think that's the biggest thing, is understanding. So when I'm applying these and coming up with these different activities, these different situations, I'm not saying, okay, I want this athlete to do this. I want to put them in a situation where they choose whatever they do, but they understand the intention. They understand, okay, I'm in this position, so this is what I want them, and it's going to be different for offensive and defense. I just think the intention side is really, really important. That I feel like a lot of people miss, but everything is always, human to human. But we will, because then you'll get people saying, well, what if a kid's not ready? And I understand that. And so that's what I call our initial, I don't like the word progression, but our initial, whatever the initial activity that we introduce this type of training to someone, we call it a 1-on-0, but they're reacting or responding. I don't like the word reacting, but they're responding to an individual, but that individual is stationary, and maybe that individual is stepping, leaning, looking, whatever it may be, that they're still looking at body language and perceiving body language to help with that action.
Sure. So you talked about a lot of your population's invasion sports. So like I guess like basketball. I've heard that term. So it's like basketball, soccer. You're invading, and other teams invading where your goal is, or hockey. I'm assuming that's probably right.
Yeah, you are.
And I mean, I guess it's pretty simple, but I'm like, oh, I don't want to get it wrong, and so so and then but you talk about intention. So what are like when you're setting up these human to human, one player's like like you said, the player could be jumping a certain way, and you have to react to the way they jump, or the 1-0 and the two the different setups and the small sidedness to it. Like what outside of just giving them the instructions, here's the setup, here's what you're gonna do, like from a rules perspective, the framework. You said intention. Like, what's the intentionality behind the actual or instructions behind
Yeah,
how they
so
move?
yeah, so with the agility, so it's different. So the agility intentions is going to be different than the plyos, but well, I'll talk about the agility. So from an intention standpoint, so you have an offensive mindset and a defensive mindset. So basically, what I tell the athletes, it's through the offensive lens and the defensive lens. And so if you're in the offensive lens, all right, you are trying, to create space. You're trying to get that defensive player to overcommit or put them at a disadvantageous position. You're trying to challenge the defense or the opponent's perceptual cognitive abilities. So you have these specific intentions that you're trying to do, and you're going to have different motor patterns, to try to, accomplish that. And then on the defensive side, you're trying to shorten that space or get into the athlete's bubble. You're trying to stay in an advantageous position. All right. And you're also, and this is where kind of that perceptual cognitive, the skills are really important. You're trying to manipulate time and space so that you can prevent any potential movement options from the offense. So instead of it being uncertain, you're making it predictable because you are dictating, you are forcing the offensive athlete, to the right, to the left, or whatever the case may be. You are dictating the situation. So that's what I mean by intentions.
Oh, right on. That makes a lot of sense, and I think that really helped kind of because this is an audio show, right? You're listening in the car. It's like, okay, I hear all these instructions, but a video would be helpful, right? Like, and I'll try to put some stuff in the show
And
notes too.
that's a tough thing with this, Joe, is that there's, obviously there's the theories, then there's the application, and the theories can get complicated, and then the application can, and that the best way, you could do the best through talking, through dialogue, but you're absolutely right. Everything you got to see visuals to kind of understand. But the beauty of this, and this is why, and I don't understand. I guess I do understand because I was in that position where, your typical physical preparation coach, strength and conditioning coach, whatever you want to call it, whatever we're called these days, they want everything to go their way. They want everything perfect. They want 90-degree angles. They want everyone looking the same. But with this whole, the perception, action, intention, with the constraints-led approach, the beauty of this is that you can, the coach, you can set up. It's if you understand a sport, you understand the common sport problems, and you are creative. You can set up. There's no right or really wrong way, and that's what the beauty of this is. And honestly, that's how I look, and I kind of go, kind of that dynamical systems theories with the repetition without repetition. Where we really change. I basically every single week we change the activity, and there might be some similarities, but I never put an athlete from an activity standpoint in the same activity, and then within the activity we do not put an athlete in the same situation, consecutively 2 times in a row. It's always changing, and that seems like holy cow, that's a lot of work. But when you really break it down, and it's just really kind of manipulating stances, manipulating angles, manipulating directions, workspace size, the opponents, obstacles, barriers, training implements. There's so many different ways. If you understand the theory to it, it's actually really simple, and you can work. And this is something I've, this past summer I had, especially one group comes to mind where I had it was 14 and 18-year-olds, or 15 and 18-year-olds, excuse me. And there was a couple 15-year-olds that looked and act like they were closer to 12. And I was very, very hesitant with kind of throwing him into the mix with this. But by using the constraints, you can really individualize and custom and make sure that that information at that time and that problem they're trying to solve, is appropriate for them. So it's actually it's very suitable for groups. It's very suitable for different sports. It's very suitable for different levels. You just have to understand the sport, the problems, and you have to have a creative mind.
You're listening to the Just Fly Performance Podcast, brought to you by Simply Faster. Yeah, I think about I think I read that the Franz Bosch Strength and Coordination book, and I highlighted the majority of it, but honestly, I'm a little fuzzy on a lot of that stuff, in terms of my recall. My college recollection brain isn't that good on. Sometimes it's more I like just getting my hands dirty and learning from that. But it seems like, as I remember, and maybe just from other papers I've read, once your basic hardline skills, the ability to run, the ability to cut, you have those abilities, then the more random it is, the better, because the retention will be better when it matters. In a game situation. Whereas if it's blocked and just boom, 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 the same thing over and over again, it's this is at least what as I remember, but I think you aren't going to be able to recall it as well. You don't get as much stimuli different situations, or I don't know. Am I totally off, James, or does that sound?
Oh, yeah, no, I completely agree. And I just think though too is, and I understand both sides of the argument where it's basically we want to have kind of that closed to open progression, or it's just freaking nuts. And it's basically, there's kind of two sides, to this, if you want to call it the human movement system or skill acquisition, whatever you want to call it. How I look at it in my situation is that I have a total program. And I believe that, with these different attractors and these movement principles, I truly believe that they can be, addressed elsewhere. And so when I'm training agility, all right, I'm always including that perception, that cognition. That's a must for me. All right, but maybe I'm working on, one of the movement principles, maybe that kind of hip lock, swing leg retraction, whatever it may be. Maybe I'm doing that with my acceleration work. If I'm working more kind of creating that, from a lateral cut standpoint, deceleration, maybe I'm working that more with my lateral bounding. There's other ways that you can teach these movement principles throughout your program, these attractors, than saying, okay, I want every athlete doing this, and until they do this, then you're ready for this next progression. I just don't agree with it. If you have kind of a holistic approach and, you have different components, because we train every quality throughout the year. The only thing that I change is the volume. We have an emphasis. So it's kind of, whatever vertical integration, style, I believe that those key principles, can be developed. And I think that with the agility, that perception, that cognition, we got to think of that as just as important, as, the biomechanics and stuff like that.
Yeah. One thing I wanted to bring up with all this stuff, and again, without videos, I think just kind of talking about principles is awesome, and directions and ways coaches can be creative in their own program. And one thing that really kind of hit me recently is the idea of, and I've seen this for a little bit with tennis players. I'm seeing it now even with swimmers a little bit, which is just an individual sport. But kind of this idea, if the athletes, the exercises you choose for your program, if the athletes who are the best players on the team are the best at those exercises, then you're doing a good job at exercise selection, basically. And when I say that for myself, and even outside of my own the perception reaction realm in my own work, even just doing some of the Marvin Marinovich stuff with the physio ball and seeing how people move on the physio ball, and when they're called on to, I guess my reaction is just having them reverse the movement or do halves and quarters and just different cognitive stuff where their brain has to work a little bit and see how they preserve movement. And it definitely is where the best players in the team, guys who play courts 1, 2 and stuff like that, are generally the best at it, and I would imagine the same exists in the stuff that you're doing. Regardless of if a guy's the strongest or not, or maybe the fastest or not, they're probably the guys who are probably more the all-state or all-league or all-conference I would imagine are probably better at the drills that you do. I mean, I imagine there's that parallel there, right? And
Yeah, 100%. Especially the athletes, and it's very rare, but I still have athletes that play multiple sports, which is great, and
yeah,
I'm an advocate for it. But we do have the athletes that just play one sport, and since we have, there's very limited general play. There's basically none. That's gone. General play is gone. PE's limited, and then you have kids, and especially in the ice hockey world, which that whole sport is just completely foreign in itself, to the human body. When I have the athletes, I guess it's dependent on the sport, I will say, because you'll have the best hockey players, but when they come in, they are not the best movers. They are not from a global athletic standpoint. They it's not what you think. But if I do have a talented hockey, and he's talented at lacrosse, and he's talented at another sport, yes, they definitely are the ones that there's still a learning curve if they're not used to this type of training stimulus. There is still a curve, but they adapt, and they really they respond well to it.
yeah, it's cool. Yeah, I mean, hockey player perception reaction with hockey, right? And you're talking about facility limitations, environmental limitations. It's not like you don't have an ice rink at your place to do like perception reaction on ice, right? So it's a little.
Oh, but honestly, but that's what, like I was saying, I was like, if I have some coaches that are sport coaches, that are interested and are starting to apply some of these concepts, and they're seeing. I mean, they're and the big and I don't have any research, I don't have any data, and I know so a lot of people probably aren't going to listen to this, but I truly believe that perceptual ability, that ability to interpret that sensory information, if that is poor, your actions are going to be poor. And I truly believe that it's not the strength, it's not the power, it's not the speed, because you see these athletes. Some of these athletes, are freaks of natures, but they're still having these soft tissue injuries. They're still having, these problems. I truly believe that. I'm not saying it's the whole piece, but I'm telling you, I truly believe that it's part of the equation. That if we do improve, it's been 2 years for me, so obviously it's very, very. I have a very small pool of athletes to draw from, but the athletes that have improved on it, I haven't had any in the ice hockey world. It's the adductors, it's the psoas, it's that kind of lower ab oblique. Those are I haven't had any type of issues. Obviously, there's a lot of variables. There's a lot of different things going on, but it's very interesting to me, to see the importance, not just from a motor learning and a skill acquisition standpoint, but also from an injury standpoint as well.
Yeah. Oh, I like it a lot, and it makes me think about, well, I had a couple thoughts before I get to my next, I guess, question. Is I was thinking too about how I think creativity is definitely, as an athlete, you talked about that is critical, right? But even as a coach too, I was just thinking, how creative can you be? There will come, I mean, in just doing general, if you look at the Bondarchuk pyramid, if all you're doing is GE and GPE, or SPE, like the bottom two, like just the general exercises, how creative can you truly be? And at what point does creativity there almost, does it ever detract, because it's not, that skill is farther away from the sport? It seems like the creativity is almost better utilized with stuff that has a higher transfer. Like that's where the mental energy goes.
Yeah, 100%. I will say though that I have with and this is recently, I have experimented with a couple. I have 10 athletes that have been with me 5+ years, and I have been experimenting with doing some weight. So basically, your traditional deadlift, split squat, squats, where we will do. So we run some of our athletes. We run kind of a high-low approach. So we have our max effort, dynamic effort type idea. Type split. When the weight is lower and we're looking for more kind of that velocity of the bar, that's the emphasis. We have experimented, and it's been really interesting because, like you were saying, the kids that are the talented multi-sport athlete, they excel with the perception cognition. And some of these, perception, adding the perception to the plyometrics, which, more, allows for, that creative expression. we've had where the athlete will perform a lift and instead of just going pre-planned from point A to point B, whether it's a full or partial, we will have another athlete call, and we just use 1, 2, 3, where 3 is the deep range, 2 is the middle, 1's the quarter range, where on the eccentric we call it, and the athlete has to go to that specific position with the load and obviously the load isn't heavy. It's not as heavy as, traditional max effort. So it's more dynamic effort type stuff, but it's really interesting to see them do that, and compare with other athletes that, are still at that level, but struggle with the perceptual and the creative
Mm-hmm.
expression. And they struggle with that. They have a tough time with that too. So that's something that, and I'm not, I still see, your big rock movements. I mean, those have been around forever for a reason. And I'm not gonna, try to reinvent the wheel, but I think there's something to that, from a, I don't want to say an unpredictable standpoint, but from really allowing the athlete to just, it's not pre-planned. It's
Yeah.
not, okay, you do this. There is some type of, okay, I have these different options and I have to make a decision.
Yeah, yeah, that I love that stuff. Like it's it's fun too to watch, and that's where I've literally just started doing that stuff the last few months after spending some time with Gary Marinovich and like kind of seeing how I mean, when that guy coaches you, is just the intensity is just. I mean, he is intense when he coaches you like you're going to be in the game or a fight because him and Marv, are famous for training like BJ Penn and fighters and stuff, and like it's almost like he's creating an environment that is going to make you create in you what it is to compete and calling like you're doing range of motion. It's like half, quarter, half, full, like, and you're just trying to fly and keep up with it. And I'm like, I just remember going through. I was like, I have never done anything like this before. I mean, this is, and just like what you were saying too, with like even in a warm up situation, it just lights people up. And from a nervous, not like fries them out muscular, but like lights, they're ready to go.
Oh,
And
yeah, agreed.
yeah, and I think that's really cool too. Yeah, you had said that with the squat, like, and but again, like doing like a faster squat. The faster what you're doing is, the closer it is to sport. Like I mean,
Exactly.
obviously being able to develop force is good. Being able to lift some heavy weights is good. But like, it's almost like it's almost like there's that bandwidth of the faster it is and the closer it is to sport, the more that creativity really can be fully harnessed. Because it's like, to be creative with like a max dead, I don't know how many ways you can be creative with a max deadlift. I mean, you can do VBT on it and like tag it some different ways, but like I'd rather take my energy and spend it like what you're doing, like and stuff that hits harder from a transfer perspective.
Completely agree. 100%.
Awesome, man. All right, so last thing I got for you, and I think this is a good like correlation and causation. Like, and I saw this was actually on Michael Zweifel's blog. It was something like correlation doesn't equal causation, and I think this was in regards to something with sprinting or like some tests with depth jumping. Like the best sprinters had like the fastest, depth jump rate of force or something like that. Like stuff that I could definitely see it. But he said like, but does that mean that getting better at that test is going to make you better at sprinting, right? So this is another just devil's advocate question. Again, I like throwing these out, but like, and maybe this is a chance for you to speak a little bit to the results and improvement that you've seen. But and I kind of had that feeling, right, that the best sport players, the people who were getting playing time and doing well, were going to be the people who were crushing it at the perception reaction work you were doing. But could you talk a little bit about the reverse of that, like someone who might not be as good at that stuff and the improvement curves you're seeing, just things you've been seeing in this 2 years in terms of the impact that has been making on the quality of movement. If there's any way you can, you're trying to. I mean, and intuition is awesome. I never discount that. It's probably my main thing. I'm a shortcomer in quantitative stuff or qualitative. Sorry, numbers.
Yeah.
But yeah, what types of results are you seeing? That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, no, I gotcha. So even with, and I think this is important to state because, and I guess it could be at every level. Even the athletes, so the skillful athletes, the multi sport athletes, at my level, they still, I mean, they're young. They still have, we call it a movement solution toolbox or a movement strategy toolbox. Their toolbox is still very, very small, relatively speaking. So we still, even if they're still good, still if they're able, to complete tasks, or if they're still making really quick decisions, or they're in a, defensive situation and they're controlling the offense completely, or if they're in the offensive situation, they're creating space. They can basically fool the defense. These athletes are still kids, and they still tend to want to do what they're good at. And so that's a big thing, especially as a coach and using this kind of constraints approach, without telling them, facilitating and guiding, allowing them. So if you have an athlete, and this is just trying to keep it simple, but if you have an athlete that's always going right and he's completing his tasks, I need to get him going left.
Mm-hmm.
He needs to get going. I need him going in a different direction. So that's something to be mindful of too. But with the athletes that have struggled, honestly, it's obviously learning is a nonlinear process, and it's ongoing. The big thing that I see is that yes, there's going to be mistakes, and I want kids to experiment. I want kids to try different things, but there's really that fine line because, and it's going to kind of sound corny, but when I'm working with these young kids, I'm trying to build their confidence, and that's a real big thing that I think not a lot of coaches, I think some coaches miss, and that can be very, very impactful. So there's that, if you have a kid that is constantly getting beat, he's constantly it's to the point where he's embarrassed. There's got to be some some type of manipulation, some type of change, within the activity. But I have with these younger athletes, with these athletes that have poor perceptual skills, I definitely seen, if you do it appropriately, I've definitely seen them being able, from a decision making standpoint, and it's obviously it's very hard to give data on this type of stuff, but you can see from a coach's eye, you can just see them making split second decisions. You can see them making that split second decision, and how that decision, and just to give an example, how that decision affects their cut step, or how that decision affects that that sprint, or how that decision affects that drop step in that 180-degree turn, or whatever it may be. That you can see how, and it's pretty glaring. It's noticeable. You can see the importance of that side and how it relates, to the motor pattern, to the action. It's the big thing is and this is what we tell our athletes, is that everyone's gonna adapt, everyone's gonna learn at different rates. It's not gonna be this smooth line going up like you see in a textbook. It's undulating. It's some days are good, some days are bad, and honestly, there's some times where I've had an athlete struggle, and I knew he could handle it, and I had a relationship with this athlete, so I knew he could handle it, and he had a tough 2 months, and then all of a sudden things were clicking, and that, to me, that's fascinating. And so to me, it's just, and that's something that I really try to, and obviously the maturity, where that kid is at, from a maturation standpoint, from a psychological standpoint, you've got to understand the situation, where there's some kids, if they miss a rep, their day is ruined, or you have a kid that, he can miss, 20 sessions in a row, and then he finally gets it and he's thrilled. So you got to, obviously that's where the art is, and you got to understand the population you're working with. But definitely I have seen the kids, and it's noticeable. You'll see a kid just sprint, completely come to a dead stop, literally you can tell he's thinking, and then make a cut. And you have another kid where he'll sprint, he'll decelerate, he'll drop down, and it's just effortlessly make a decision. And sometimes he anticipates it's right, sometimes it's wrong, but you can see that smooth transition. So it's pretty easy, to see, but a lot of coaches don't like that because you can't really measure it. And that's something that, I'm open to anyone that has different ideas with how to measure that. Like I said, I'm very fascinated about it, but I don't have any objective information. Everything is subjective through video and through seeing and through my athletes' feedback.
Yeah. It's not easy to quantify. Maybe once GPS gets really good and some quantum computing gets this crazy algorithm or something. But no, I think that's awesome, James. Yeah, man, it's just the whole world of creativity and coaching that just goes beyond, just get strong and just get fast is awesome to me. I love learning about it, and I'm glad I could spend some time with you this Saturday afternoon / evening chatting. And so I appreciate your time, man. Thanks for being on the show, and best of luck with what's going on at U of Strength. I'm sure it's a lot of athletes getting a lot faster, stronger, and more reactive for their sport.
Thanks, Joel. Hey, and I appreciate everything you're doing, man. This podcast is my go-to. You're doing a fantastic, job, and you're really pushing the industry and a lot of coaches, in the right direction. So thank you because I know this is a lot of work. This is not easy, especially being a family man. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in today. Appreciate you guys listening. And man, I just looked through these recent episodes, and man, I love this stuff. It's literally changing my coaching every day. It's changing the things that I look at. It's changing the ways I view creativity and just the context and what I'm trying to get out of the workouts that I create and how I observe those exercises and workouts. Again, it's just a blessing to have such great guests. If you like the show, please leave us a rating or review on iTunes, Stitcher, whatever you're listening to. Didn't mention it in the early bit, but my new book, Speed Strength, is now out on Just Fly Sports. So head on over to justflysports.com and you can find it there. It's something that I've put a lot of work into, and it's getting great reviews by a lot of the best in the field. And I just think it's a creative piece that has a lot of information that you won't see anywhere else. Again, our sponsor, simplyfaster.com, a huge part of what we do. They have an amazing blog, tech tools, and monitoring equipment data, force plates, free lap timing system, training tools such as K-Box, and a great company doing great things. So be sure to support them, and we will see you guys next week with another great guest.